come to the United States Senate. It takes a lot to prepare testimony, and it just means a lot to me that each of you would take some time out to come this afternoon. It's a tough day in the Senate. As Senator Kennedy knows, there's a lot of folks that are dealing with what could be the last day here for some time, so you have to forgive if the attendance is light or if people come in and out. Please don't allow anybody on either side of the aisle to think it's reflective of the urgency of the importance of the subject matter. I'm going to start with my formal testimony, then I'm going to defer to Senator Kennedy for his, and then we will proceed to the witnesses. But I just want to say again, good afternoon, and this subcommittee is coming to order. This subcommittee focuses on issues relating to criminal justice. And today we're here to discuss what I believe is our responsibility to keep the people held in custody in our country's prisons and jails safe as a matter of that high ideal of justice. This reflects this subcommittee's broader purpose of ensuring that our criminal justice system is fair and balanced, and to improve public safety for all of our communities. As the only senator now that currently lives in a low-income, really below the poverty line community, I want everybody to know I take crime seriously. We have a lot of crime challenges, and there is a lot of issues that we contend with in the communities in which I live. It's not often that we can report some successes, though, and I think it's by no part the acts of Congress who've helped to support a lot of the change that we're seeing. Just 2 days ago, the FBI released its 2023 crime statistics, and reports show that violent crime in the United States dropped for the third straight year in a row, with rape dropping nearly 10% and an 11.6% decrease in murder and manslaughter compared to 2022. This is actually the biggest one-year drop in murders ever reported by the FBI, or reported in the last 20 years by the FBI. And this is a remarkable reversal from the end of 2020, when the murder rate spiked to increase at a pretty significant rate. I'm grateful again for Congress and what we've done in a bipartisan manner to help empower our law enforcement. We know we've made tremendous investments in public safety. Under the American Rescue Plan, the administration provided over $15 billion to communities to hire more police, equip first responders with life-saving tools, and expand community violence interventions. It's passed common sense gun safety laws, many of which we've done in a bipartisan manner to get more illegal firearms off the streets. It is these investments that really have helped to bring down the historically high crime rates we saw at the beginning of this president's term. We also learned this week that overdose deaths declined nationally by 10% between April 2023 and 2024. Non-fatal overdoses are down 10%. And again, this is a tribute to bipartisan work by this committee and others to take common sense approaches to the crisis in overdoses. We've seen a lot of good work done. But today's business is a different aspect of our challenges with crime in America, and this will be an important discussion. We're here to discuss the prevalence of sexual assault in our country's prisons and the successes of failures of a specific bill called the Prison Rape Elimination Act. I want to acknowledge again the courage of our witnesses who will share their personal and painful experiences that they've had while incarcerated. Your powerful stories make clear that Congress must do all it can and do to ensure people's safety and security. I also want to advise everyone in attendance and those watching this hearing online that today's hearing will feature discussions of rape and sexual assault and other challenging topics. 21 years ago, Congress unanimously passed a bipartisan bill, the Prison Rape Elimination Act, also known as PREA. The bill was championed by a broad coalition that included evangelical Christians who were outraged by the epidemic of rape and sexual violence in prisons, and organized together in an extraordinary way. Evangelicals from all around the country, including my state, organized themselves to ensure that incarcerated people were treated with dignity and protected while in custody. This coalition was led by a guiding principle in Scripture that is actually one that's guided my life. It's Matthew 25, chapter 40, that says, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters, you did for me. This is the truth, how we treat the least of us. It's defining to who we are as a people, and I believe who we are as individuals. How we treat the least of these is how we should be judged. This truth was enshrined by our founding fathers' constitutional ideal that everyone should be free from cruel and unusual punishment. Jeff Sessions, senator then, was the lead sponsor of PREA, and he recognized this tenet of American democracy. During the bill's passage, he said very bluntly, "It is the duty of government officials to ensure that those who are convicted and sentenced to prison serve only the sentence imposed by the judge. Rape is not a part of any lawful sentence." PREA is the nation's first federal civil law addressing sexual violence in correctional and detention settings. It announced a zero-tolerance standard for rape in prisons and aimed to make the prevention of sexual assault a top priority in each prison system. PREA ushered in comprehensive data collection, training for tens of thousands of correctional staff, and has provided states with $75 million in grant funding over the last 20 years. But sexual violence in prisons and custodial settings still persists. We were all horrified when 7 correctional officers, including the warden and PREA coordinator, were sentenced for sexually abusing those in custody at FCI Dublin in California. This egregious example makes clear that sexual violence behind prison walls persists and it must be rooted out. Sexual abuse in prisons creates a legacy of trauma for its survivors. Disproportionately, these people are ones who survived prior sexual violence, people with behavioral health needs, LGBTQ people, and especially we see this violence often directed towards our young people. This endangers the communities they reenter, and it frustrates the mission of law-abiding correctional officers. The overwhelming majority of our correctional officers are heroic, work hard, and often find themselves in a workplace that still has difficulties and challenges. We know our correctional officers are understaffed, under-resourced, underfunded, and not allowed to do the things that they are trained to do. I was really heartened when Senator Cornyn partnered with Senator Schatz, something I believe Senator Kennedy might agree with me is a pretty impressive coalition. But Cornyn and Schatz continued to build on PREA's bipartisan tradition by working together on the Sexual Abuse Services in Detention Act to fund emotional support services to incarcerated survivors. One of my heroes, Brian Stevenson, offers that the true measure of our character is how we treat the poor, the disfavored, the accused, the incarcerated, and the condemned. I'm confident that this subcommittee will embrace its duty to protect the incarcerated people from sexual abuse in prisons. I'm confident that the scripture that has guided my life and Jeff Sessions will actually embolden the spirit of this body. I'm confident that the solutions we will explore today enjoy the same bipartisan united response we saw 21 years to come together and pass PREA. And I look forward to a productive conversation with this extraordinary panel. And I turn now to the ranking member of this subcommittee, to the man who's courageous enough to stand in for the ranking member and really pick up for our colleague. And I just want to turn right now to my friend from Louisiana, Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Cotton, who's the regular chairman, sends his apologies. He's very, very sorry he could not be here today. But I'm glad I'm here today, and I'm looking forward to this testimony. I think it was St. Augustine who said, justice is when you get what you deserve. Justice is when you get what you deserve. And you may be thinking, well, that doesn't tell us anything. What do you deserve? But I think it serves as an invitation to all of us as a society to debate what is justice? If punishment is appropriate, what is appropriate punishment? I don't think any fair-minded person believes that rape or sexual violence is justice. It just isn't. And I'm looking forward to learning today from these esteemed witnesses here in front of us, and I am thankful to our chairman for calling this hearing.
I'm again really grateful for Senator Kennedy. I know how busy he is, and his presence here today, I think, reflects his commitment to these issues and the issues of public safety as a whole. And I want to welcome my colleagues, Senator Whitehouse and Senator Padilla. We have, as I said before, a really powerful panel of experts. I'm going to introduce and swear in the witnesses. The witnesses will give their opening testimony in the order that I introduce you, and senators will then have 5 minutes of questioning. If it's okay with the ranking member, I will save myself for last. You can go first, or I'll go to Senator Whitehouse, whichever you prefer, sir.
Let me see, my choice is me or White House, whatever you want to do.
All right, sir. I'm going to actually defer to my ranking member, breaking with tradition. It's time we shake things up a little bit here, and then we'll proceed with Senator Whitehouse. But I first obviously want to turn to the witness testimonies. The first witness is Brianna Wingfield. Ms. Wingfield was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. She currently lives in Dallas, Texas, with her 2 children, ages 16 and 8. Ms. Wingfield graduated from California State University, Long Beach in 2022 with a Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology. She will receive her teaching credential in December 2024. Congratulations, that's exciting. In the meantime, she is working as a substitute teacher for children from preschool to 6th grade. Thank you for being here. Our second witness is Julie Abate, the National Advocacy Director of Just Detention International. Hope you have big business cards, that's a lot. Where she works with correctional officials, policymakers, and prisoner advocates to address custodial sexual abuse and conditions of confinement. Prior to joining JDI, she spent 15 years in the United States Department of Justice as a senior trial attorney, and then deputy chief in the special litigation section of the Civil Rights Division. We thank her for that service. And she was there responsible for enforcing the Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act. She was a member of the U.S. Attorney General's Prison Rape Elimination Act Working Group, which promulgated the national standards to prevent, detect, and respond to prison rape. She is also a certified PREA auditor. Ms. Abate received her Bachelor's of Arts degree with a major in Women's Studies from the University of Michigan and her JD from the Howard University Law School, and she was magna cum laude. Our third witness is Bonnie Hernandez, a mother of 2 daughters, a grandmother, and the daughter to a retired United States Marine. She is a former employee of a Fortune 500 company, an avid reader, and a returning citizen who served 12 years in a federal prison. Bonnie is also a survivor of sexual violence perpetrated by a Federal Bureau of Prisons officer during her time in custody. The now former BOP officer was convicted and sentenced for his criminal actions. Bonnie was released from prison in May of 2024, 2 years early, thanks to compassionate release and the new Sentencing Commission policy statement that allows survivors of sexual abuse to petition the sentencing court for a reduced sentence. Bonnie earned her GED and attended Penn Valley Community College before her time in prison. While in custody, she taught a number of classes, including GED, behavioral health, and world history. She now resides in Lee's Summit, Missouri, a suburb of Kansas City. Our fourth witness is Kenneth James, Director of Settlement Compliance at South Carolina's Department of Juvenile Justice. And with no disrespect to our 2 South Carolina senators, perhaps the proudest South Carolinian in the Senate right now. Mr. James served as the Division Director of Compliance and Standards and the agency PREA coordinator for the South Carolina Department of Corrections. Before transferring to South Carolina Department of Corrections in 2019, he served as the PREA coordinator for the South Carolina Department of Juvenile Justice and in multiple leadership and management positions for over 17 years. He also served as a correctional officer, sergeant, lieutenant, and captain at the South Carolina Department of Juvenile Justice. Mr. James holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Limestone College and a master's degree in criminal justice, public administration from Liberty University. It says here that Senator Cotton would introduce the other witnesses. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Brandy Moore White, welcome. Ms. White is the national president of the Council of Prison Locals. That's a union representing about 30,000 correctional officers and staff. Before she became that organization's president, she was its national secretary-treasurer for 6 years. I'm happy she was able to take time out of her busy schedule to fly here from Arkansas today and be with us. Ms. White is here to shed light on some aspects of sexual abuse in prisons that has not received the attention it deserves, and we welcome her today.
Can I add, Brandy has been here numerous times before. I'm going to punch her card. She might get a free sub. She's been willing to come here to the Senate so often. She's been a tremendous witness in the past. I'm just so happy you're here again, and your testimony will be invaluable. Thank you.
Our final witness is Ms. Kelsey Bowler. Am I saying that name right? Ms. Bowler is the Director of Storytelling and a Senior Policy Analyst at the Independent Women's Forum. That's an organization that advocates for women, supports opportunities for women. Thank you for your work. She is also a Senior Blankley Fellow at the Steamboat Institute. Kelsey has worked extensively on the topic of biologically male transgender inmates in women's prisons. She recently co-produced a mini-documentary series entitled, quote, "Cruel and Unusual Punishment, the Male Takeover of Women's Prisons," end quote. I also have a letter, actually it was given to Senator Cotton, but he's not here. I have a letter addressed to Chair Booker and addressed to Senator Cotton from Ms. Ami Ikikawa. Am I saying that right? Say that again. Ichikawa, okay. Amy, okay. Amy is a former inmate at a women's prison. She was interviewed by Ms. Bowler about her experiences in prison. The letter provides insights into the protections that the Prison Rape Elimination Act provides, but also discusses how enforcement and accountability has been lacking in women's prisons. And Mr. Chair, I ask of consent to submit that letter for the record.
Absolutely no objections.
And thank you to all of our witnesses.
I'm going to now ask everybody to please rise from your chairs and raise your right hand and answer this question, hopefully all in the affirmative. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give before the subcommittee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that each witness has answered in the affirmative. You all may step down. That made for a great picture as well. Okay, you all will have 5 minutes for your opening statements. And I think I said in the order of the introduction, why don't we just simply go from Ms. Wingfield and work our way down to our proud South Carolinian. Why don't we start with you, Ms. Wingfield? Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Booker and Senator Kennedy, for inviting me to tell my story. And thank you to my fellow panelists for your courage and for being here today. I appreciate the entire committee considering this issue and inviting me here as a witness. It's going to take all of us to fix this broken system that has damaged and upended so many lives. My name is Brianna Wingfield. I currently live in Dallas, Texas. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. My story is no different from thousands of others. At 14, I was hungry, poor, and alone, with only my grandmother around to raise me. We needed money just to go to McDonald's, and there was never enough to eat. One day, my friend and I stole a woman's purse at a laundromat. We ran off with it and turned the corner. When I looked inside the purse, I saw a pacifier and realized she had a baby. I made a mistake that day and took the money, but insisted that we return the purse. We were arrested and charged with robbery. That woman came to our hearing and pleaded with the judge to let us go. We were only 14 years old, starving and suffering, and just trying to survive in a system that was stacked against us. I didn't think it could get much worse. I could have never expected what was to come. I was first placed at Los Padrinos. Deputy Probation Officer Delatorre transported us and forced 2 girls to have sex in front of him in the van. He made me show him my breasts and touched them, kissed me on the mouth, and made sexual comments. This also happened in a juvenile holding cell at the Compton, California courthouse. Imagine being in a holding cell as a child, awaiting your hearing, and you are sexually assaulted. The fear was terrifying. I complied because I didn't want to receive a harsher sentence. That threat was always held over us. Where were the supervisors? No one interfered or protected us. What kind of system works this way? An unlawful system. I was then sent to juvenile probation camp Joseph Scott in 2005, which was supposed to provide support and rehabilitation. Instead, I was sexually abused almost daily. A particular guard, Jeffrey Eckler, forced me to perform sexual acts with other young girls while he watched and touched us. He leered at me while showering, always hiding behind his sunglasses. These are the examples of the horrific abuse I endured at Camp Scott. I couldn't tell anyone for fear of punishment or retribution. I didn't know who I could turn to and report the abuse. We were never offered any type of support. We were never told we could report the abuse to or make formal complaints. Even the female guards participated and turned a blind eye to the brazen abuse inside those walls. It didn't feel like there was anywhere to turn or that anyone was safe. Guards would offer some girls treats or other benefits if they complied with sexual demands and orders. We were threatened that refusals would result in more punishment. The abuse was sexual and deeply psychological. I was terrified every minute of every day and just wanted to be released, to go home. I did what I needed to do to survive. I was just a child. All of us who had spent time at these camps would never be the same again. We were promised at Camp Scott that we would be protected, but all the girls experienced rape and sexual assault. No one was protected, and every single one of us was abused in ways you cannot imagine. And that still haunts us. It was a nightmare that I've never been able to shake. These were not rehabilitation camps. They were nothing more than concentration camps. I've worked hard to move on from my abuse, violence, and suffering. I've devoted myself to my work as a substitute teacher, but just like before, I am fighting back against the system stacked against me. Because I am not a full-time employee, I have not been able to get access to health insurance. I do not have a therapist. In moments where I have not seen a way out, I've had to call the crisis hotline after hotline, grasping at anything to keep me alive. Though I've worked hard to build a life beyond Camp Scott, I carry this weight with me everywhere I go. It's hung over me for decades. But being here, telling my story, it gives me some hope. This investigation is long overdue because the Prison Rape Elimination Act of 2003 isn't being enforced. It isn't working. It's not enough. Countless women and girls are still being raped, abused, and violated in every way possible. Each day that goes by is another day where this cycle of suffering continues. I think of the young girls incarcerated as we sit here right now, this very moment, and know in my heart they are still not safe. You all have the power to protect us, to protect all girls and women. So I'm asking you today to not only listen to our stories, but to please do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you for your courageous testimony, Ms. Wingfield. Ms. White.
Good afternoon, Chairman Booker, Senator Kennedy, members of the Subcommittee on Criminal Justice and Counterterrorism, and distinguished guests. I want to sincerely thank you for the opportunity to present the perspective of our federal prison system from the professional, hardworking men and women of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. I must once again make mention that for far too long, this conversation has been missing a key element, and that is the professional law enforcement officers who have dedicated their lives to protecting those co-workers and communities and safely housing inmates. The Council of Prison Locals represents nearly 30,000 correctional professionals across the country in 121 federal prisons. These professional law enforcement officers work tirelessly day in and day out in some of the most violent, self-contained cities in the country and keep us all safe from some of the world's most dangerous human beings. Let me start my remarks today by saying that the council absolutely condemns sexual abuse of inmates. Our job is to ensure that the safety and security of the institutions where we work and sexual abuse of individuals should never be tolerated. While we applaud the goal behind PREA, there are definitely truly some shortfalls. The primary concern is current staffing levels within the Bureau of Prisons. The staffing level is so catastrophic, it has and it will, again, lead to a loss of life. The most efficient way to provide security and oversight is not cameras or technology, it is staffing. This must be addressed urgently, and not only for the protection of our staff, but also for the inmates housed in our custody. Secondly, the level of funding for the Bureau, the money that they receive to achieve its mission, the current funding level is inadequate at best and has caused the Bureau to reduce a lot of things to include training. This hinders our ability to effectively carry out the Bureau's mission of rehabilitation and reintegration, among many other things. While I know there will be a lot of discussion today about sexual abuse of inmates, there's a whole other side to the discussion that Congress needs to be made aware of and needs to address in some substantial way. The fact of the matter is, inmates are frequently sexually harassing and assaulting Bureau of Prisons staff inside our facilities. The Federal Bureau of Prisons could not operate with the almost 10,000 or 30% of our female staff that we currently have. As noted by a recent UN report addressing the effects of females working in prison, the role of females in prison goes far beyond working in women's prisons. In all facilities where presence of women staff can often diffuse potential violent incidents when confrontations arise. The strength of women officers in prison lies not just in their ability to enforce rules and in their courage and resilience, but also in their innate capacity to empathize, make profound difference by fostering a more habilitative atmosphere. The DOJ Inspector General Michael Hurwitz noted in a February 23, 2023 report on the Federal Bureau of Prisons' efforts to address sexual harassment and sexual assault committed by inmates towards staff, that inmate on staff sexual harassment is widespread. In addition to rape, sexual assault, inmates subject employees to egregious sexual harassment, including exposing their genitalia, exhibitionary masturbation, throwing semen, threats of sexual violence, and a constant barrage of vile, cruel, and degrading sexual comments. I can wholeheartedly tell you female staff are quitting because the sexual abuse to which they are subjected, thereby further worsening the understaffing crisis and further reducing our ability to keep everyone safe inside of the walls in which we work. The prison where inmate sexual misconduct is rampant have the attitude that nothing can be done to stop it, and that this is what the employees signed up for when they agreed to work for the BOP. Despite that attitude, there are prisons where inmate sexual misconduct is not tolerated, and there are steps that can be taken to protect our staff. It is unclear to me why we refuse to prioritize staffing our prisons, thereby protecting our staff and the inmates in our care. Not only has this caused the Bureau to lose staff, but it has cost the agency well over $31 million in just 2 lawsuits alone brought by female staff. In 2016, $20 million was paid to female staff at FCC Coleman, and 2018, $11 million to female staff at FCC Victorville. In the settlements just mentioned, the Bureau agreed to undertake programmatic relief as a result of the class action lawsuit brought by female staff against the agency for failure to prevent inmate sexual harassment. But this was just implemented Bureau-wide this year. This in itself is a step in the right direction, but it is far from the end of the solution. Chairman Booker, Senator Kinney, and distinguished guests, I look forward to answering any of your questions. Thank you.
No, thank you, Ms. Brandymore-White. You've had to come here multiple times in the Senate to point out, as we said in the hearing on this very subject, the utter crisis we have in supporting the law enforcement officers who keep us safe and how under-resourced they are. So thank you for, again, making that point crystal clear. Ms. Julie Abate.
Chairperson Booker, Senator Kennedy, and esteemed members of the subcommittee, I'm pleased to be here on behalf of Just Detention International to discuss the impact of the Prison Rape Elimination Act on custodial sexual safety since it was passed in 2003 and since the PREA standards were implemented or promulgated in 2012. Just Detention International is a health and human rights organization that seeks to end sexual abuse in all forms of detention. JDA was founded by two formerly incarcerated survivors of prison rape. JDI is also the only organization in the world that is dedicated exclusively to ending sexual abuse behind bars, and all of our work is informed by the wisdom and the experiences of prisoner rape survivors. JDI knows that sexual abuse in detention is preventable. Prisons and jails with committed leaders, strong policies, sound practices, and adequate funding can help keep people safe. And we have to, because when the government takes away someone's freedom, it also takes on an absolute responsibility to keep that person safe. No matter what crime that person may have committed, rape is not part of the penalty. I've personally been working on this issue of ending prisoner sexual abuse since I graduated from law school in 1993. That's just over 30 years, and my experience informs my testimony here today. I started out first in private practice doing class action litigation, and then, as you heard, worked for 15 years at the Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, Special Litigation Section. I was honored to be a member of the Attorney General's Prison Rape Elimination Act working group that put out the federal PREA standards. And I've been the National Advocacy Director at JDI since 2018. My work with JDI has, without question, been the most rewarding. It provides the opportunity to work directly with correctional agencies and facilities before abuses occur. The national PREA standards are what provide the framework for those facilities to strengthen their systems and their practices. PREA has created a lot of positive change in correctional facilities, in their policies, in their practices, and how people experience their time in custody, living there, or working there. PREA has forced all of us to acknowledge the harms of custodial sexual abuse. Jails and prisons have become a bit safer for incarcerated people and staff through implementing the PREA standards. But is PREA working? I think anyone would be hard-pressed to answer that in the affirmative, having heard Ms. Wingfield's testimony and expecting to hear Ms. Hernandez's testimony this afternoon, or when we hear Ms. Bowler when she testifies about the experiences of the women who have trusted her with their stories. And thank you both so much for being here in person today to share your stories. It takes incredible courage. And these women are sharing these experiences not because it's fun or they want to be here or they like talking about this. They're sharing their experiences because PREA did not work for them. They want to make sure that no other person can say the same thing. PREA failed them, and it's failing other incarcerated peoples. And until PREA works for everyone, we cannot claim success. I've learned a lot about custodial sexual abuse in the past 3 decades, visited over 100 correctional facilities, listened to and learned from incarcerated people and formerly incarcerated people, far too many of whom have experienced sexual abuse behind bars. And I've worked with and learned from countless correctional officials. One of the most positive takeaways from my experience in this field is the dedication of our most hidden law enforcement personnel, people who work in our jails and prisons. In almost every facility I've been in, there are staff members there working not only to do their jobs, but to improve conditions for people who live there and work in those facilities. And as you've heard, those conditions they work under are extremely demanding, and they're getting more so, with staffing levels that are diminishing seemingly daily. Their work is often heroic and almost always unrecognized. I would like to take a minute and recognize the efforts of the correctional witnesses here today, Mr. James and Ms. White. Thank you for being here today and for all you do for the field of corrections. We know it's not easy. So what can we do? 3 things. First, we have to stop relying so heavily on survivors to report abuse. Survivors should, of course, have methods to report. They need to have their voices heard, and their reports should never be ignored. But We simply cannot rely on the most vulnerable people with the most to lose and wait for them to step forward before we take action and do what we know we have to do. Staff also need those same types of external reporting mechanisms, and they need to be protected from retaliation for using them. And leadership must always respond to reports they receive from staff. In addition, investigative staff should use their skills to identify red flags of abuse that's occurring. They should use those skills to uncover abuse, even when survivors can't or won't report abuse, or when staff don't report signs of abuse. Second, we must support people who experience sexual abuse in custody. As we've heard, the effects of sexual abuse are devastating and they're long-lasting. We urge Congress to pass the bipartisan Sexual Abuse Services in Detention Act, led by Senators John Cornyn and Brian Schatz in the Senate and introduced today in the House by Representatives Sidney Kamlager-Dove and Kelly Armstrong. The act would ensure that when incarcerated people suffer sexual abuse, they have support to process and heal from the trauma. And finally, Congress should ensure that the grants authorized by the PREA statute and administered by DOJ are consistently and robustly funded. Those grants are designed to directly assist the field with PREA appropriations. And PREA appropriations have remained at $15.5 million for the past 6 years. That's just not enough. Even $75 million over 20 years, if we break that down per year, and if all 50 states got an equal share, that'd be $75,000 a year to implement these types of practices and improvements that can improve safety for folks in custody. It's not enough. In addition to funding grants to states, those appropriations are also used for data collection by DOJ's Bureau of Justice Statistics. While DOJ leverages these funds as best they can to support states, much more is needed. Having such a modest appropriation forces DOJ to curtail certain crucial PREA implementation efforts to support others, and we need more robust funding. And I thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and discuss these issues with you. Thank you so much for your attention to these issues.
Thank you, Ms. Abate. Your expertise, too, is appreciated. Ms. Hernandez, thank you.
Start, or is it on?
No, you had it before. There you go.
Chair Booker, Senator Kennedy, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear today to testify about my experience as a survivor of sexual abuse by a BOP employee. My name is Bonnie Hernandez. In 2015, I was sentenced to 192 months in prison after pleading guilty to felony charges involving drugs, weapons, and money laundering. I am the mother of two extraordinary daughters, Bailey, who is here with me today, and Madison. They have been my strength and my comfort, and being their mother is truly my proudest accomplishment. I had a steady job in corporate America, but when the company was looking to cut costs, I found myself out of a job. I was desperate to provide for my family, and I got involved in selling and using drugs. I deeply regret what I did, and I've always accepted full responsibility for my actions. In July 2015, I was sent to FCI Tallahassee to serve my time. While there, I had regular access to fresh air and BOP recreational programs, and most importantly, I was able to have video visits with my daughters. All I wanted was to serve my time, pay for my mistakes, and return home to my family as quickly as possible. But I had no idea how high of a price I would end up having to pay. In 2019, my job was reassigned to a new supervisor, Correctional Officer Linton Hatton. Not long after my reassignment, Officer Hatton began showing me extra attention. He brought me contraband like makeup, made sexual comments towards me, and would grope me while we were alone in his office. Eventually, he began repeatedly raping me. Officer Hatton used his power and authority over my body to manipulate and violently abuse me. When I first got to prison, as a part of our orientation, I was made to watch an outdated video on PREA. It warned me about sexual violence from other prisoners, but it did not warn me about violence that might be perpetrated by the people who were paid to protect me. And that video was pretty much the last time I ever received information about my rights under PREA. During my time at Tallahassee, I'd seen what happened to people who'd been groped and abused and who reported it to staff. They were relocated, put in this special housing unit and retaliated against in ways that made it clear to me that when Hatton came for me, the best thing I could do was to keep my mouth shut about his sexual violence. But eventually, Hatton's violence escalated. It got to the point where I feared for my life and had no choice but to report him, even though I was terrified to do so. When I reported that he had been repeatedly and violently raping me, I too was retaliated against, just as I feared. I was called a snitch by others. I was put in the special housing unit. But most upsetting, a few days after reporting, I was transported without my knowledge in the wee hours of the morning from FCI Tallahassee to FDC Miami. FDC Miami is a pretrial detention center. It has no outdoor space, no programming, no jobs, and no technology to facilitate the video calls with my daughters that we depended on. I was cut off from the support systems and outlets at a time when I needed them the absolute most. A few months after I got to FDC Miami, a PREA investigator came to my unit. The guard said that anyone who would like to talk to the investigators were welcome to do so and could wait in line in front of everyone else. I did not even get in that line, but they called my name over the loudspeaker. Everyone saw me go talk to the investigator. The PREA investigator was a day late and $1 short. And it turns out that Officer Hatton was prosecuted for his crimes against me. He was sentenced to 3 months in prison. And do you know, no one even told me that he had been prosecuted and punished for the things he did to me. And by the time he was prosecuted, served his time, and released from custody, I was still sitting in a cell in FDC Miami, completely alone and hopeless. I knew it wouldn't be easy coming forward, but I never thought reporting my abuse would make my life in prison as awful as it was. I was a survivor of crime in federal prison perpetrated by a federal law enforcement officer, but I certainly never felt like anyone had my back or was looking out for me. Thanks to compassion release and the new Sentencing Commission policy statement that allows victims of abuse to seek a reduced sentence, I was released from prison in May of 2024. When I walked out of FDC Miami, it was the first time in 2 years that I had breathed in any fresh air. When I got off the airplane, it was the first time in 2 years that I even saw my daughter's faces. As I sit here, I am only a few months into my freedom. Coming home was one of the happiest moments of my life, and it has also been incredibly difficult. I still have trauma to deal with, the court-ordered therapy, and yet it took 4 months for me to get to see a therapist. I desperately need a job, but red tape has prevented me from getting the paperwork I need for a job. I connected with numerous reentry organizations, but they all have wait lists and criteria that make it difficult to get help. I have to provide urine samples roughly twice a week, and it requires driving each way, yet I still don't have my driver's license back. Luckily, I have the greatest dad in the world, and he drives me where I need to go. But I could not make it to any of my appointments if I had to walk or take an Uber. And so what about the people who don't have what I do? Being here today is among one of the hardest things I have ever done. But I am here for my daughters and here for so many other women I left behind in prison who I knew were being abused. I hope that in sharing my story, it will help make the road ahead for them a little less rocky. Thank you for your time, for giving me the opportunity to share my story, and for your commitment to bettering the lives of people in prison.
Ms. Hernandez, thank you for your courageous testimony. Ms. Bowler.
Good afternoon, Chairman Booker, Senator Kennedy, and members of the committee. My name is Kelsey Bowler, and I'm the director of IW Features, the storytelling platform at Independent Women's Forum. Every day, we work to amplify real stories to show how public policy affects Americans, aiming to positively influence policy and promote more civil, compassionate, and productive debates. Some of the most devastating stories we've collected at IW Features are those of women who've been harassed, assaulted, or raped in prison as a direct result of policies that allow male inmates to transfer into women's prisons. While every story of sexual abuse is tragic and deserving of attention, what's different about these stories is that every single one of them could have been easily prevented by keeping biological men out of women's prisons. In hope we can urgently address this inhumane punishment of women, today I will share with you 3 stories that we've collected as part of our ongoing documentary series, Cruel and Unusual Punishment, the Male Takeover of Female Prisons. Each of these inmates from Central California Women's Prison, or CCWF, was impacted by SB 132, a California law passed in 2020 that allows males to be housed in female-only prisons by simply declaring a non-male gender. The first is Alyssa Kamholtz. When Alyssa was a little girl, her mother gave her to her stepfather, a member of the notorious Hells Angels motorcycle gang, as a wedding present. For over a decade, Alyssa was subjected to continuous sexual abuse from the gang members. After spending over 20 years in CCWF, her safe place after years of such horrific abuse, the state placed a male inmate with similar physical characteristics as her abusers in Alyssa's room. To make matters worse, Alyssa found out that her new male bunkmate was even affiliated with the same gang of men who abused her as a young girl. Alyssa told us, quote, "I feel like even being sentenced to prison was easier than having to deal with that. Our sentence wasn't to be abused." Kathleen Quinn lost her parole after objecting to SB 132 and reporting that a male repeatedly peeped on her while she used the bathroom naked from the waist down. Kathleen had served nearly 20 years and was only 3 weeks away from her parole date. By that point, her family had already made arrangements for her to come home. But because she reported this man's repeated behaviors and told the prison she did not feel safe living with men, Kathleen now must wait another 5 years in prison. For some female inmates, speaking out means sacrificing an earlier release date and spending more time behind bars. Finally, the third woman, who I will call Jane Doe, shared a bunk bed with Tremaine Carroll, a 6-foot, 2-inch, 200-pound male. 3 days after moving into his cell, Jane was raped by Carroll in the shower. After the assault, Jane told us she has panic attacks daily, takes medication to quell her violent nightmares, and can only shower once every 3 days due to the trauma. While she ultimately changed her mind about going public using her name, she told us she wanted to be the last female inmate raped as a result of policies like SB 132. Sadly, that wasn't the case. Within 24 hours of raping Jane Doe, Tremaine Carroll was credibly accused of raping another victim. The aim of the Prison Rape Elimination Act was to create zero tolerance for prison rape. By allowing men to self-identify as women and transfer into women's prisons, we are not just tolerating rape, but enabling it. Similar to the situation we were in prior to the passing of PRERA, the need for more data on the effects of policies that allow male inmates into women's prisons is obvious. But we shouldn't wait for data to dictate what these stories already make clear. Policies that grant inmates placement based on their self-declared gender identity have already caused demonstrable harm. Nationwide, an estimated 86% of women in jail are sexual violence survivors. As Senator Cory Booker has aptly described it, there's a survivor of sexual trauma to prisoner pipeline. Putting these women directly back into the nexus of their crimes not only puts them in physical danger, it robs them of the opportunity to rehabilitate and heal. Before closing, I would like to thank this committee for its recent decision to oppose judicial nominee Sarah Netburn. Opposing Netburn's nomination was a meaningful step towards protecting our forgotten female inmates, but so much more must be done. Until all female inmates are protected, Independent Women's Forum will continue amplifying their stories so that all Americans understand the inhumanity of locking up female victims of abuse with convicted male rapists, pedophiles, and murderers. This is not a left or a right issue. It is a human issue. Incarcerated women need and deserve female-only spaces. Anything less is a violation of their dignity and their most basic human rights. Thank you for your time, and thank you for allowing me to be a voice for so many women who, for so long, were unable to speak for themselves.
Thank you, Ms. Bowler, for your testimony. Mr. Kenneth James.
Good afternoon, Chairman Booker, Senator Kennedy, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify at today's important hearing on the Prison Rape Elimination Act. Sexual abuse is a horrific crime that has no place in any detention facility, and corrections officials have a core responsibility to ensure that every person in their custody is safe and treated with dignity. I've worked in corrections for over 22 years, the last 7 as a PREA coordinator in both adult and juvenile facilities in the great state of South Carolina. I am a board member of the National PREA Coordinators Working Group, which is an organization of PREA coordinators from across the nation who support their peers in implementing PREA standards. I am also retired from the South Carolina Army National Guard and served multiple overseas tours. I have seen the positive impact of PREA on the safety and culture of our institutions. In both juvenile and adult facilities, when I began in corrections, there was a widespread assumption that sexual abuse was not really a problem or that it was an inevitable part of prison life. Staff often didn't know what to do when they learned of sexual abuse, and so it went largely ignored. Now, we are breaking the silence around this abuse. Once a survivor steps forward, our agencies help ensure they get crisis services from trained victim advocates from the community. Despite the progress that has been made and the work that has been done to prevent sexual abuse in detention, it is still happening. Even one person being sexually abused is too many, and there's still more work to be done. For those reasons, I offer the following recommendations for this committee's consideration. First, support states with PREA implementation challenges. Congress can help corrections become stronger in preventing sexual abuse of incarcerated people. Assistance can come in the form of guidance or provisions that support prosecutions of perpetrators of sexual abuse in detention. Strengthening consequences for bad faith reporting, helping survivors get assistance with trauma during and after incarceration, and increased funding for the work dedicated to culture change and the promotion of staff safety and wellness, as well as assistance with recruiting additional high-quality correctional staff. Second, support training and education on sexual abuse in detention. Congress should support training and education to help prosecutors, judges, law enforcement, and the greater community understand the prevalence of sexual abuse in correctional facilities and the need to provide substantial consequences to perpetrators in order to deter the behavior, such as pursuing criminal charges and penalties when these actions are taken. Third, increased funding for PREA implementation. The advances that PREA sought required funding to be fully implemented, and additional funding is needed to continue this work. I recommend Congress to continue the PREA grant programs that have been available and increase PREA funding overall. Furthermore, I recommend Congress allow the assurance option to continue, providing funding to support states that are still working on compliance. Next, include state and local corrections in the DOJ's PREA working group. Current correctional practitioners, such as the PREA Coordinators Working Group, need to be members of the Department of Justice PREA Working Group. The DOJ group is tasked with issuing guidance to the field on PREA standards. Current practitioners need to have a seat at that table from states and local jurisdictions. Lastly, pass Senate Bill 1422, the Sexual Abuse Services in Detention Act. A key part of PREA compliance is ensuring that incarcerated survivors of sexual abuse get emotional support services. While some correctional agencies have been able to provide services like we do in South Carolina, others struggle with doing so for various reasons, including lack of capacity. This bill would provide resources for both community rape crisis centers and corrections agencies to facilitate bringing in support services into the prisons and jails. In closing, there are hundreds of dedicated correctional professionals like myself across the nation working hard not only to implement the PREA standards, but to keep people in custody safe. There have been significant strides made since the passage of the PREA standards in 2012. But the reality is, it is not time for the government to take its foot off the gas. Rather, we should be looking to increase the support and to maintain and further improve the safety of facilities. I urge this committee to join us in doing so. Thank you.
Mr. James, thank you for being here again, and thank you for your expert testimony. At this point, we're going to begin with some questioning. I'm going to defer to Senator Kennedy, and I'm also going to, obviously ask your questions. Still, I will not be firmly enforcing any time limits, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Cory. Ms. Hernandez, Bailey and Madison are here?
Bailey, my oldest daughter, is here, yes.
Where's Bailey? Hey, Bailey. Welcome. You were in a federal prison, Ms. Hernandez?
Yes, sir. The FCI Tallahassee.
And when did the rapes by this federal prison employee of you occur? Just what year?
Well, it started in about 2020, and then ended in 2022, August of 2022.
Okay. And you reported him.
I did.
And he was eventually punished.
Correct.
And what was his punishment?
3 months.
Was he prosecuted?
Yes.
I mean, in federal court or state court, if you know?
I don't know if it was state court or not. I know it was in Florida.
Yeah. And he got 3 months for rape?
Yes, sir.
Well, that's part of the problem right there. What you allow is what will continue. I mean, 3 months for rape is absurd, much less for repeated rape. Ms. White, let me ask you a question. You talked about inmates violating sexually and being engaging in offensive conduct with respect to female federal prison staff.
Yes, sir.
Are those inmates who do that not punished?
No, sir, not typically.
Why not?
That's a very good question. Oftentimes, the incidents are reported. Our prisons are very overpopulated. Discipline is an issue that we have been struggling with. Even when they are reported, it's handled internally with a small sanction. Typically, they're removed from general population and placed in special housing unit for a limited amount of time and then placed back in general housing. It's not a true punishment, and it definitely is not a deterrent. Oftentimes, those issues are turned over to the AUSA offices who decline to prosecute the inmates.
Okay. Ms. Bowler, let me ask you a couple questions. I want to be sure I understand your testimony. The state of California has a law that says if you're convicted of a crime, you can declare your gender and you can go to a women's prison if you are biologically a male but declare yourself transgender. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. Does the state of California require any confirmation of one's gender identity?
There is some type of review process, but it is based on the individual's self-declared gender identity. These individuals don't have to be identifying as transgender or non-binary prior to being convicted and entering prison. It is based on their self-declared gender identity. And I will note that many female inmates we have talked to tell us once they gain access to women's prisons behind closed doors, they are no longer identifying as transgender. They are embracing their natural male identity.
Is this primarily an issue in California, or does your organization get reports from other states?
It is certainly the most pervasive in California, since California was on the forefront, one of the first states in the country to pass this state law. But the BOP also generally recommends housing inmates based on their gender identity. There is, again, a review process there.
Wait, you say the BOPs, that's the federal prison
Bureau
system?
of Prison. Under the Biden-Harris administration, they ordered federal prisons to recognize trans-identified inmates' health and safety when making housing decisions, and even declared for the first time that gender-affirming surgery may be medically appropriate, which means taxpayers would be funding it.
These rapes that you talked about, do we have any idea how many have occurred nationwide?
I think that is one of the problems, and that was one of the problems, my understanding, going into PRERA, that there was a lack of reporting. I can tell you in California, state numbers are that 2,186 trans-identified inmates exist in the state. As of now, I'm aware of 351 of them requesting to go to female
Could you give me those numbers once more? I apologize.
2,186 trans-identified inmates currently exist, according to the latest numbers reported by California. Of those, only 351 of them are actually trying to go into female prisons. And I'd also note, in 2022, 1/3 of trans-identifying inmates seeking access to the female prisons were registered sex offenders.
Okay, so there are 2,200 transgender women in women's prisons in California?
Those are just all trans-identified individuals, so they could be biological men or biological women, from my understanding.
Okay. All right, last question, and I've really gone way over here. Mr. James and Ms. Abate, give me 30 or 45 seconds if you were President of the United States, what you would do to fix this problem.
I was President of the United States.
Microphone. You should say that with more bass in your voice. You're president.
Yes, sir.
You're president.
Yes, sir.
So let it be heard.
As President of the United States, I would do an executive order asking for additional funding for all incarceration facilities across this nation, increase staffing, and push that all correctional facilities have professional employees who are heroes. The reason I would say that is because if you think of the worst things that happens in this country and the worst people who conduct these things, where are they housed? And who is monitoring those individuals where they are? If we look at how we celebrate people in this nation, rightly so, we call our heroes our military, our law enforcement officers, our firefighters, and our EMTs. But we forget the people who monitor the people we call the worst in our country. And so one of the reasons we don't have a robust correctional staffing in this country is because we don't celebrate those people who take the risk to be correctional officers.
Let me ask you this, Mr. James.
Yes, sir.
And I don't disagree with anything you said. How about adding to your list punishing the hell out of people who rape other people in prison?
I agree. But president doesn't make laws, sir.
Yes, sir. But when you get to be president, I'll bet you can get it done.
Yes, sir. Will you vote for me, sir?
Yes, sir.
We all heard that.
Ms. Abate.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
I'm looking for specific, how do we stop this?
So first of all, I think we have to realize that when we over-sentence people for any crimes, we're overpopulating our prisons. At the same time, staffing numbers are dwindling. That is dangerous for incarcerated people.
I know, but you can't let people rape other people, whether in prison or outside of prison.
So let's focus on what the people involved in this system need. And the people that are in the prisons need access to outside folks so they can have support, so they can report things safely, so that it can receive counseling from community organizations that can translate into when they leave the facility, so they can have that ability to heal from the trauma and process what's happened to them. We need to ensure that staff are provided with what they need to do their jobs, including adequate training, adequate numbers, the ability to take a day off to go see a kid's recital without having to call in sick because you know you won't be allowed to go, thereby forcing other folks to supplement when you need time off. We have to take care of the people in these institutions, because as much as some staff are the problem in this area, all staff are the solution. We have to listen to Ms. White, we have to listen to Mr. James, listen to the field what they need. We have to continue our efforts to enforce these PREA standards. They're providing us with the best answer. We've had criminal laws saying you can't rape anybody anywhere. Raping people in custody has always been against everyone's policies, and yet we still needed to, in 2003, pass the Prison Rape Elimination Act. That's outrageous. So that was designed to study, how does it happen? What is it about these systems? And so I urge us to look at those reasons, look at what came from those discussions, bipartisan discussions, PREA Rape Commission and the commissioners, and see what we came up with at the at DOJ, ultimately. I think it provides the best answer and the best way to cure the situation, but we have to have adequate funding and attention, and we have to listen to people, we have to believe them, regardless of what color your uniform is. If it's orange, if it's blue or brown, staff are reporting these things, they know what's going on, they are not being listened to. We've got to hold facility and agency leadership accountable and to take action when they find out about this stuff, because they know, and they don't, and that is not okay. And if agencies aren't listening to their leaders and their staff, you think people didn't know that a warden was raping people? They did. They reported. Nothing happened. How are women ever supposed to come forward? How are men supposed to come forward who've experienced sexual abuse in custody? We have to support the people that work and live in our prisons.
Well, I want to thank all of you for being here. I've learned a lot. They're blowing up my phone here. You can't hear it because I put it on silent. Because I've got to be back in my office. So I'm going to have to take leave. I'm asking my staff here and making a note to myself. Ms. Hernandez, I'm going to find out why someone raped you and got 3 months of punishment.
Thank you.
I'm going to find that out. Okay? That's not right.
Thank you.
I mean, that's not justice. And I want to thank my friend, Senator Booker, for calling this hearing. Cory always has interesting topics, and I always learn a lot. And I would have let White House go first if he had been here.
I will never bicker if you fail to call me Booker. But I know how demanding the day is. And I know you were.
I'm sorry.
You were stepping in at the last minute, so I really appreciate you. And again, we're praying for Senator Cotton in this time of grief. All right.
Thank you,
sir.
folks. I'm sorry what happened to y'all. I mean, I'm really sorry. Okay.
Thank you, sir. I want to pick up Mr. James right where you left off, because when you were offered the chance to be President of the United States, the first thing that you said was something that Ms. White has said, which is, God, I would fund these institutions better. And it was affirmed by Ms. Abate. And so if Senator Kennedy and I were going to partner on a bill to try to stop this from happening, the first thing that you would say would be, some of it is just this massively under-resourced institutions, as the minority witness is saying, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much. I said that before he left, so I might be able to get a partner.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir.
I said that so I might be able to get a partner. And I'm just going to say, Ms. White, I pray for the day you do not have to come down here and tell this story over and over and over again. That even when Congress did things in a bipartisan way under a Republican president to do sentencing reform, programs for prisons that Senator Cornyn and others championed, we cannot get those things done if we're not funding the institutions that are supposed to be doing that work. It's embarrassing that you have to come down here and tell the truth of all of our law enforcement agencies, the fact that you all are so underfunded and so underpaid and so under-resourced, and that this has been echoed by majority witnesses here is just a further testimony to the truth that you tell, and I'm going to do everything I can, as long as New Jersey keeps me in this job, to listen to this woman from Arkansas and try to address those issues.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Wingfield and Ms. Hernandez, I just want to build some more background to support some of the statements that we've heard from other witnesses, if you all don't mind. And maybe the first thing I just would want to bluntly ask you, as horrific as your experiences were, the women that you were with, do you know other firsthand stories that you heard from other women of their experiences of sexual assault? Either one of you can go first.
I absolutely do.
Could you flesh that answer out, Ms. Hernandez first, and we'll go to Ms. Wingfield?
I said I absolutely do.
No, I heard that.
Oh.
Could you just give me more context to that? Did it happen one time? Did you hear from did other women confide in you in some of these experiences?
Too many times to count. While I was at FCI Tallahassee, I had friends. It was just so many different departments. I knew everybody there. I was there for a long time, so a lot of the inmates, I had time to do. So I knew a lot of inmates because I worked recreation, but every department had something going on with an officer and an inmate.
Ms. Wingfield, do you want to tell me a little bit about you hearing from other people that this behavior might not have been something that you just experienced? Could you turn on? Thank you very much, Ms. White.
Yes. So I've heard the stories. In Camp Scott, you had the deputies there. They stayed, at Camp Scott at trailers. You can actually see they would have certain girls go to their trailers and say that they're helping them clean up for extra things or whatever. But when they would come back, when certain girls would come back, they would just tell us guess what happened, guess what I did, or guess what, and it was just like it was talked about so much, it was like it was normal,
Right, and these are this would be considered in a court of law hearsay. This is not that, and I don't want to affirm that these things are happening. But I guess the point I'm trying to drive to is, and maybe Mr. James or Ms. Abate, you can tell me that I hear from my readings that is there an underreporting problem?
Thank you for that question, Senator Booker. Statistically, in South Carolina, we've had an increase in reporting, and that's because of the robust programs that we've built in South Carolina Department of Corrections and Department of Juvenile Justice, putting out more information, posters, phones, different reporting methods for incarcerated persons to contact somebody from the outside or contact somebody on the inside to do something about allegations of sexual abuse or sexual harassment. We in South Carolina have a very supportive governor and a very supportive executive leadership team. Mr. Brian Sterling, Mr. Brian Sterling, the director of South Carolina Department of Corrections, is an advocate of sending incarcerated persons back into the community better than we receive them. And that includes those who get injured mentally, physically, or emotionally while inside of corrections. And he supports the efforts that we have tried to do at his Department of Corrections to have a zero tolerance policy and attack every single allegation with everything we have to ensure that we send the citizens of South Carolina back into the community whole.
Understood. Ms. Abate, is there, in your opinion, an underreporting problem?
Yes, absolutely. With all the barriers and disincentives and dangers that come when you report, to me, it's a wonder that anyone ever reports. It's an incredible act of bravery or desperation or both, because women aren't believed. It takes being repeatedly sexually abused or raped by staff to come forward. That's not even okay, right? When staff come forward and report something's going on, nothing's done. So why would other folks report? But when you've got when you're working towards a culture of reporting, like Mr. James in South Carolina, that's when you do see the increases in reports. That's when you can understand the dynamics in the specific facility, understand how it's happening so you can understand how to prevent it and how to support the people involved in the abuse that witness it, that endure it, because it affects the entire facility. If a staff is sexually abusing a person in their custody, they are not on their post. Who is? If a staff can take a couple people, a couple women, a couple girls into a certain area, what's to say that those two girls or that one woman or that man couldn't take staff into that same area and hold them hostage or harm them. It compromises security. And so often, as you've heard from at least Ms. Wingfield, when there is sexual abuse, people give their victims items that might be candy or maybe cigarettes or a cell phone, stuff they ought not have, that exposes the people who receive it to vulnerability, prosecution maybe, right? So there's all these disincentives.
Ms. Hernandez, I'm sorry to cut you off, Ms. Abate. That the bringing of gifts, the bringing of things, is this contraband issue part of the process?
Yes.
And you see that as a way of creating a context in which sexual assault happens.
That is very true.
And then I think that some of the other witnesses said either in their written testimony or what they're saying now, but I think it's really important to note this ability to contact people on the outside, because reporting, I imagine, is intimidating if you're reporting it to people inside. But when you had that change and you had less ability to contact people on the outside, did that make it more difficult for you to talk about your experiences or maybe seek help?
Yes, made it very difficult. And that would be the time when I need the most support.
And you're
we
seeing
didn't
that.
have that.
And Ms. Abate, you're seeing that as well.
Isolation breeds vulnerability, and it enhances the trauma that people have suffered. It's a way to control people and keep them quiet. It's a way to make people submit to advances, and it's never providing sexual favors. Favors are something you give to someone at a party because you like them, and that is not what's happening in these facilities. It's submitting to sexual coercion from staff. And the mere threat of being placed in segregation, which would mean that Ms. Hernandez wouldn't be able to call her daughters or what have you, she's going to put up less of a resistance. Anybody in that situation. I don't mean to personalize it.
No,
and so when you cut people off from support from the outside, from their family, it's devastating. When you cut people off from support from the outside, from trained counselors who can help you decide whether and how to report abuse, that can be devastating too. Even when you move someone from different housing units, especially in women's prisons, the women form families, if you will, little groups, and draw support from one another, and you take them away from their support systems. That enhances their vulnerability. Everybody who reports sexual abuse who's placed in segregation, there goes their vulnerability. It completely enhances their vulnerability. So yes, it's a huge problem.
And Ms. Hernandez and Ms. Wingfield, you both sort of made allusions like that the PREA videos and information you were given when you first came in felt inadequate to you. I mean, that's my word, not yours. But in other words, there's certain information that should be given to you, but that did not prove resourceful at all?
When I first had seen that video, that was the only video I saw during orientation when I first got to prison. First of all, it's not enforced. They stick you in a psychology conference room, and it's everybody that's going to orientation in that moment. And then they don't stick around. They don't, like I said, it's not enforced. The facilitator leaves the room, and then you're left with a bunch of inmates who are just taking whatever we want out the video because it's like a joking matter. I can personally tell you that the video I watched, the joke was like outstanding forever. It was, don't take that Snicker bar. Don't eat that honey bun that you're offered from another inmate. And again, it doesn't really, I don't remember not one time thinking about somebody who was supposed to protect me and knowing what my rights were.
And Ms. Abate, you would agree that the orientation and information given is important, something we should be looking at?
It's super important, and I think on the outside we too make jokes about that particular video about the candy bar left on the bed, and be careful because other inmates are going to get you. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but it's not where the most of the problem's coming from. But there needs to be robust prisoner education, and more so, you need to like talk the talk, walk the walk when folks are in staff come around, and create that culture of safety, the culture of reporting, and just increases safety for the people who are incarcerated, the people who work there, the facility overall, and ultimately the community. And it begins with education and training.
Mr. James, I'm going to direct the question to you, then I'm going to yield to my colleagues who've arrived and as they've settled in. The biggest remaining gaps in PREA or prison conditions in general that you would say that allow for sexual violence in prisons to continue?
Thank you for that question. I think it's a shortage of staff.
You're returning to the same point before.
Same point, sir.
I love that you've just reinforced that for the record. I'm going to cut you off there, and I'm going to ask Mr. Senator up. I was just told, Senator Welch, if you're prepared.
I want to say a couple of things. First of all, thank you so much. And I apologize for being late. There's conflicts in our schedules, but I was able to see much of your testimony in my office. So I just want to, from the bottom of my heart, pay my respect to you and appreciation to you for coming forward. I also want to thank the chairman. You know, it's kind of easy around here to pass legislation to hold people accountable. It's harder to pass legislation to protect people who, as a result of the power of the state, have the capacity to put people in jail. I was a former public defender, and the obligation that the state has when it uses its incredible authority to put people in jail is to make certain that they're safe there. And we've not done that. My state of Vermont, we had a terrible situation at a women's prison. It was the subject of an excellent reporting piece by 7 Days, which is a local publication. But it was pretty shocking to me, even as a public defender. So, Mr. Chairman, I do want to thank you for bringing this to our attention. And I want to thank our witnesses for everything that you're doing to help us deal with this as opposed to bury it. Thank you. So I'll just ask a few questions. Some of these I hope are not too repetitive. But for Bonnie Hernandez and Breanne Wingfield, how meaningful was it for you to know that there would be somebody that would listen to your horrific experience and document it and bring your perpetrator to justice?
Well, this means everything to me. This was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. Of course, I'm nervous and, you know, apprehensive about coming and sharing my story, feeling like I'm going to be judged and everything else. But it is the impact to me to just be able to share my story and let you guys absolutely know how things are really done or ran in a prison, because you don't have that setting. It's very...
You know, that gets me to another question. You know, if we just look at the data, we miss a lot. You know, so if we just look at the data on sexual assaults in prison, what do we miss about stories like yours?
Everything that comes along with it, because just like trying to report, when we talk about reporting to SIS or OIG, nothing in prison is private. There's nothing confidential. Somebody's always looking. Somebody's always watching. And prison is violent.
Yeah.
So we don't want that. We don't want to report. We don't want somebody seeing us talk to SIS or, you know, anything like that, especially when staff is not protecting us and they're turning a blind eye because they think plausible deniability covers them. Or they have exemplary employees that they don't want to see get in trouble. And there's just so many red flags that you guys don't see.
Breanne, thank you very much.
Yeah, so, sorry, my mind is blank. I'm so sorry, sir.
No, you know what? We are so glad you're here.
Thank
you so much. It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, Senator Welch, again, my fear of not saying anything, because of course no one believing me. I'm already considered a quote unquote a criminal, and fear of retaliation as well, you know. And again, it happened so much to so many girls that, I mean, you did report it. If you have no one backing you up, you know, you scared of what would be to come. So.
Well, thank you. I'm going to ask Mr. James. You're an auditor, but you also have personal experience as a correctional officer. Incredibly valuable experience for this committee. From your experience, what is the most important thing that PREA does?
It's the intent to help and to protect incarcerated people who do not have a voice. They don't have the option to go to a local magistrate's office and make a complaint. They don't have the option or even sometimes know the methods that's available to them. So the Prison Rape Elimination Act makes some mandates to agencies that they have to educate both the incarcerated population and the staff on ways to report, that mandates that they must accept reports and actions that have to be taken. We spoke before you came that there are efforts across this nation. We have a National PREA Coordinators Working Group, which is an organization that brings peers, PREA coordinators, PREA compliance managers, and stakeholders together to talk about the issues that's happening. One of the major issues is there is not enough staff. So no matter how thoughtful we are and the intent is, if there's not enough people to do it, it doesn't get done. And we have horrible, horrible stories like Ms. Hernandez and Ms. Winfield that happens because they get through the cracks. And I think I speak for the whole profession that it is not our intent that that happens, that if we could prevent it, we would. And I apologize that they even had to go through that in the first place.
Well, thank you so very much. Really appreciate your presence and your advocacy. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I'm very grateful. The senator from Georgia, Mr. Ossoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses, in particular the survivors of sexual assault, for so courageously sharing your testimony with us. I'm not sure I can accept that staffing shortages are the principal driver or even a principal driver of the failures of PREA. And I'll give you a chance to respond to that in a moment, Mr. James, but I want to ask you, Ms. Abate, you are a certified PREA auditor, correct?
Yes, I think I'm on inactive status now, though, just to be clear.
Okay. So as the chairman knows, when I was chairing the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, we conducted a number of investigations into sexual abuse in the federal prison system. One investigation found that in 2/3 of federal facilities that had housed female inmates, there had been sexual abuse of female inmates by members of the staff, 2/3. At Dublin, now infamous, the perpetrators included the warden and the chaplain. And when we look back at the PREA records at these facilities, and in particular Coleman and Dublin, two of the most notorious, where certainly in Dublin's case, I believe also in Coleman's, it was an open secret in the system that a culture of permissiveness and abuse was endemic. Dublin was so infamous that it became informally known as, quote, rape club. Again, the chaplain and the warden engaged in sexual abuse. But during the periods of crisis at these facilities, every single PREA audit found that Coleman and Dublin were compliant with every single one of the 45 PREA standards. They met or exceeded every single standard. How is that possible? How can a prison with such an endemic crisis of sexual abuse, that it's known as rape club, and the warden and the chaplain are sexually abusing inmates, meet or exceed repeatedly every single one of the 45 PREA standards?
It's an excellent question, and there's a couple answers. First, for the BOP in general, not even just including Coleman and Dublin, it appears as if the contract for the PREA audits, which is run by PREA Auditors of America, I believe is who has it now, Nakamoto had it previously, every PREA auditor that they send to a facility, whether it's a 500-bed camp or a 2,500-bed correctional complex, the auditor is limited to 3 days on site. That is not enough time to do an appropriate audit, a robust audit. That also is not fair to BOP, because when they do implement these policies and practices and PREA standards, their passing PREA audit is just as suspect as the ones at Dublin and Coleman, right? So it's not fair that the lowest bidder is going to get these contracts for the audits. I understand the procurement process, but there's also a way that you can write your proposal to ensure that people have adequate time on site. And I personally have raised this issue myself with Director Peters at least 3 times in person, 2-on-1 meetings with her. This is not something that the department doesn't know. I know that there's a lot of stuff involved in breaking contracts or getting new ones, but that's just a huge, huge problem. It's a problem that doesn't protect folks by ensuring that PREA is implemented. It leads to the impression of, or the actuality of, inadequate audits. And it makes it impossible for an audit to be conducted pursuant to the PREA Auditor Handbook that auditors are forced to comply with.
Well, I guess, are they forced to comply with it? So
They are.
Sorry. I'm not sure they are complying. I mean, at Coleman, 6 male officers repeatedly raped and abused at least 10 women. As part of the PREA audit process, auditors must review sexual abuse complaints, interview prisoners and staff, and review facilities, policies, and practices, correct?
Correct, absolutely.
And it clearly seems to me, if interviews are not conducted with female inmates at these facilities, then they've not fulfilled their inspection obligations, right?
That is true.
Okay, so in 2021, PREA auditors were not able to interview a single female prisoner at Coleman as part of their audit, and they weren't able to interview them because BOP had transferred all of them out of the prison 2 days before the on-site portion of the audit. At a time when sexual abuse was rampant in the facility, they removed the women from the prison in advance of the PREA audit. That's shocking. What's also shocking is that then Coleman passed its audit.
I agree.
How? And I know you didn't, I don't think you were on that team.
No.
I've
never actually conducted an audit. I don't know many facilities that would invite me.
How can this be so broken?
So that's not uncommon that facilities will transfer people in custody out when an auditor's coming to town. It's unusual that a whole population of women would be transferred. If you can't interview folks that are in custody, then there is a notation where you can say none were available at the time. So it's notated on the audit report. So the audits they give us something, but they don't give us everything. And they were never intended to ensure that sexual abuse wasn't occurring at a facility. You can comply with all the standards, you can have all the policies, you can have the practices, you can have the records of people getting training, you can interview the people you're supposed to interview, and you can still have rampant sexual abuse in a facility. That doesn't mean that PREA is not working. It just means that PREA doesn't work to fix systems that are in such states of crises. PREA does work to strengthen other systems to ensure they don't reach that point, but it doesn't show that sexual abuse isn't occurring. The audit report from Dublin is long as long can be, well over 100 pages, right? And it goes through the steps that auditor undertook. I have no opinion on whether the auditor was good or bad. The audit report looks like it was written properly. And we know that sexual abuse occurs. The audit doesn't say, is sexual abuse happening? Are people being abused? No, it doesn't. It says, if sexual abuse occurs, do they investigate? Do they report? Do they let the person know what happened with the outcome? Was there any discipline? That's it.
Well, thank you for your expertise, and I would just offer, Mr. Chairman, that if audits under the Prison Rape Elimination Act, pass with flying colors facilities with endemic staff-on-inmate sexual abuse, and pass with flying colors even after every woman in the facility is transferred out 2 days before the audit, then I don't think that PREA is working.
So can I rely on your expertise in this issue? Because I was just asking my staff about this, Ms. Abate, and this is where I was confused, and my staff tried to correct this with me. PREA should be setting up procedures, policies, and standards that make any sexual assaults evident, right? Do I have that right? PREA is trying to create systems in which that kind of behavior can't go on.
Prevent, detect, and respond to prisoner rape.
And so I think the Senator's point is right on then, that clearly this act, if even people are passing audits with flying colors, yet there is a culture that if this is going on in, then we should be looking, these policies that are being established are not sufficient in detecting the problem, correct?
It is neither preventing, nor detecting, nor responding.
What are you going to do when your peer coordinator is the one that's doing the abusing, as it was the case at Dublin? What if that person's also the warden?
And so Senator, have you been satisfied then that from some of our witnesses that you're getting then the fix to this? Do you understand what I'm asking? Because I'm not sure. I agree with the staffing issues that a lot of the policies we promulgate, whether it be in programming or what have you, are not getting done because we don't have the staffing issue. But I think you're scratching at a bigger issue, which is clearly the law that we designed is not working. What else should be done to make it work?
I think it's a good question for the panel, and also one where we would welcome, I would welcome, can't speak for the chairman, but send us for the record suggested amendments to the law.
I would like to ask that for the record from every witness, if you have that. That would be really helpful. I appreciate that, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
One area that we just haven't talked about, which I'd like to do, is just the challenges in juvenile settings, which seem to be, and again, Ms. Wingfield, I'm horrified that this happened when you were a teenager, when you were 14 years old. But perhaps, Ms. Abate, I can start with you. Some of the particular challenges facing youth in the facilities in regards to PREA reporting. And then the Department of Justice has consistently reported significantly higher staff on youth sexual harassment reports than youth on youth reports. And maybe could you describe for me, and maybe Mr. James, when she finishes, if you have anything to add, some of the environmental and cultural factors contributing to the higher rates of reported sexual harm amongst children?
Yeah, and I think the dynamics in a juvenile facility when we're talking about teenagers are different from adults in custody. Oftentimes those juveniles are in there for status crimes. They're only there because of their age, of what they did. They broke curfew or something that you or I could do anytime we wanted to. There's also the issue of staff being closer in age to the incarcerated people, to the juveniles. And in the juvenile facilities, it's so bizarre. The data shows that women staff more commonly are committing sexual abuse against young men in detention and boys in detention, right? And so that's the same dynamic that you have in a high school situation where you've got a young teacher and you've got that same population. There's that inability to understand the responsibility that people have when you work with kids, when young people, to not take advantage of them. There's a responsibility of people who work in juvenile facilities to recognize red flags, flirtatious behavior, favoritism, you name it, and stop it before it happens to strengthen their systems. And kids are completely charming and delightful, and they get age-appropriate crushes on authority figures like teachers or people in the media or people in their juvenile facility. That doesn't give folks free range to take advantage of that at all. They need to recognize what they can do to help these people is not to engage in sexual relations with them. So that's a different dynamic than there are in other facilities. When kids are abused, they don't report. Nobody reports on the outside. They disclose sometimes. They'll disclose little clues. Those clues need to be picked up on. And sometimes kids think, why would I report that this is how they talk to us? That's how they talk to us. Everybody knows that. What is there to report?
Mr. James, do you have anything to add to that?
I really think she appropriately answered the question, and I agree with all of the statements she just made.
So I would love the questions for the record on the from Ms. Abate, Ms. White, and Mr. James on then how do we improve PREA specifically for children and youth. I would really appreciate that. I want to do a few wrap-up comments, but I have such respect for Ms. Brandy Moore White. Watching her different expressions during this, I just want to say two things, because I think what you said at the beginning is something that I know from my personal experience, having friends who are correctional officers, not in the federal system, but I have friends who are correctional officers in my state system. The abuse, the verbal abuse, the women correctional officers I know, everything that you said, it's very important to put that on the record, and I don't want to diminish that as we talk about sexual assault from people who are inmates. I just think that's just an important statement to put out there that that these are issues. But I watched you responding a little bit, and you're somebody that I think has invaluable testimony. So if there's anything you want to comment on at all that's been said during this hearing, I just want to give you some space for that.
Sure. So apparently I need to work on my poker face.
Yeah. Not unless you want to play poker with me, then I'd be happy.
So I think I think we could talk about this for days.
Yes.
I think that this whole panel has hit on several things. I do disagree with Senator Ossoff. I do think staffing is the core of this. My grandfather owned businesses, and he said, you do not get what you expect, you get what you inspect. And that is truly the case in prisons. You need high-quality staff. Yes, these are people who have been sentenced to things, crimes that they committed. We are there to protect them as much as we're there to protect our staff from them. As Ms. Abed, I can't even pronounce her name, Miss Julie said, a lot of our staff are the forgotten heroes. They hold the walls. They house people who you cannot put in custody. And then when we receive, I'll tell you, I've experienced sexual harassment in prison myself. I have been masturbated with, against. I don't even know how you would say that. I've been catcalled. A million things. These are things in corrections that oftentimes people think are acceptable, and it is something that we have to work on all levels. I want to personally apologize to these two ladies who've experienced anything, because it is absolutely unfathomable to me. But I do think staffing is the core of this, because if you have 10 staff supervising 500 inmates, there is time for people who have ill intention to do things that they shouldn't do. When you have 100 people supervising 500, it's much less likely to happen. So staffing. You said I get frequent flyer miles. I will be here until they roll me out on a stretcher, sir, until you guys fix our staffing.
I pray it doesn't take that long.
Right.
It is for the safety and security of our inmates, for the dignity
Yes.
of law enforcement officers.
Right.
As much as this place, both sides of the aisle, we crowd around trying to praise law enforcement officers. You all are the forgotten
Yes, sir.
part of the law enforcement profession.
Yes, sir.
And so you know that the way that there was nodding on everybody on this panel when you were speaking, their poker faces were saying affirmations of what you were saying. I just want to make sure you understand that, Ms. White.
Thank you.
And I thank you for being here. I'm almost embarrassed that you were considered a minority witness because I want to say amen and hallelujah to everything you said. If I can wrap up with a few thoughts, if I may. I talked about Matthew chapter 25, verse 40 as a guiding principle in my life. I want to admit something to you that the older I've got, the more I've less like the least of these. The reality is people who are incarcerated are not the least. They have equal dignity. And in many ways, people who've returned home in my city have been some of the most amazing leaders, some of the most powerful voices, some of the greatest activists. They're people who help people with addiction. They're people who help reduce violence. They're people who, in many ways, from the nadir of their lives, they've risen to heights that should inspire those of us who've never been justice involved. This is a tough subject. And the courage, Ms. Hernandez and Ms. Wingfield, for you personally to come and tell your own stories like this, I cannot express to you how powerful that is. Both of you, even just your life stories of what you're doing now, trying to figure out how you're going to even afford a car ride. God bless your father. I say that into the record. Ms. Wingfield, the fact that you want to teach children and want to spend your life helping young people who in many ways are struggling in our country with challenges and difficulties, isolation and loneliness. The fact that you want to be there for kids in a way that we adults were not there for you when you were a teenager. You two are astounding in your courage. And I just want you to know, in your first experience before the greatest deliberative body in the world, that you two today showed a heroism and compassion and grace that's extraordinary. And I just, again, on behalf of everybody, just thank you. The other witnesses here, I'm grateful for everything that you all have shared with us. Trust me, on both sides of the aisle. I think this is an issue, as we saw with senators past, has a lot of bipartisan concern. I'm really hopeful that we can make advances by coming together on the ground and meeting on some things that I think are plain and obvious. Mr. Welch, before I close out, you're just a man of extraordinary character and heart. Do you have anything else you want to say? You should turn on your mic, though.
All right, it's just I want to join Senator Booker in thanking you. You know, we sit up here, we have important jobs, we're treated as important people, and you become invisible. I was listening to what you said. You have no privacy, and to be stripped of that, you know, it's a real part of what punishment is. But then to have that loss of any kind of privacy and autonomy be accompanied by being subject to violence and impunity, that's outrageous. And this is why you speaking out is so important, because you know how vulnerable you are, and there's no justification whatsoever for the state in using its authority to allow people around you to act with impunity towards you. And you know, I'm really grateful to Senator Booker. These are issues that we don't pay the attention to that we should, but where it's the power of the state to impose the punishment, and it is, it's the obligation of the state to protect people from impunity. And your presence here is very helpful in reminding us of our obligation. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, so much. And I will now just read this as my staff has given it to me. I'd like to submit into the record statements submitted by the members of public to this subcommittee. First, we have statements from individuals impacted by the harmful sexual violence environment at FCI Dublin in California. Their names are Darlene Baker, Aja Jasmine, Goldina Robertse, Guadalupe Smallwood, Sabrina Taylor, and Jaylyn Crosby on behalf of her mother, Inez Crosby. Kendra Drysdale is a former BOP employee from FCI Dublin, her testimony as well. These statements contain prison stories of sexual assault by those who were charged with keeping them safe. I'm grateful, too, for their vulnerability, strengthened by their courage in our fight to end sexual violence in prisons. I would like to submit into the record statements from organizations that encourage further action to end sexual violence: the Asian Law Caucus, the California Coalition for Women Prisoners, Right on Crime, an organization that I've partnered with often, and Guadalupe Smallwood. I now would like to do my fifth. Thank you very much. Just read the closing. Again, my gratitude to Senator Cotton and his staff, Senator Kennedy and his staff, but most sincerely, thank you again to all the subcommittee members, and most importantly to the witnesses. Again, many of you have traveled a great distance to come here and testify. I want to remind the members of the subcommittee that questions for the record, some really good ones towards the end, are due a week from today, Wednesday, October 2nd at 5 p.m. And I ask the witnesses to respond to those questions in a timely manner, as thoroughly as each and every one of you would like. And with that, and my deepest gratitude to every single one of you, this meeting is adjourned.